Hi there. Welcome back to the Neurotrition Podcast. I'm Dr. Z, your holistic dad doc, bringing you the best in mind-body approaches. Today we've got Greer McGuinness as our guest today. Greer, thank you for joining the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's our privilege to have you here, and just tell us all about a little bit about your background and kind of what you do and why you got into doing it.
Of course. So I'm a registered dietitian by trade. I've been working in medicine for nearly 20 years now, which, makes me feel old when I say that. But I was Western medicine trained. I worked in nursing homes and hospitals. And when I didn't want anything to do with pediatrics, I actually always said that I wasn't going to work in pediatrics. And after I had my son, I got a crash course in working in pediatrics. And unfortunately, my son regressed into autism when he was about 19 months. And it kind of catapulted me in a whole different trajectory than I really thought that I was going to be going into. And I completely switched and pivoted my career in Western medicine and changed into functional medicine for my son. I was really interested more in epidemiology and research. And so I went back to school and got my master's and, was able to not only help my son, but then I was able to help other people. So I started working then primarily in pediatrics and, specializing and becoming an expert really. And kind of by accident, again, it wasn't really what I thought I was going to be doing, but yeah, so now I have a private practice in pediatrics. I specifically specialize in kids with autism and ADHD, very similar to my son.
Right.
And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's amazing how life puts you on these journeys that you had no intention of going on, right? That's very much what happened to me in my practice. I'm really curious too about, you talk about being Western trained and, being in the thick of that. How hard was it to make that transition, and or what was the kind of the point that made sense to you to go in that different direction?
It's really funny because when you're Western medicine trained, you are fully taught and you fully believe that you were taught the correct way of medicine. I'm going to be completely honest. We were taught that chiropractors are woo-woo science and that you guys do not practice real medicine, and same with like naturopaths and stuff like that, and now that I look back at my education, I'm like, wow, we were so far off of like, not understanding how all these different modalities actually work together and how all these things could be really beneficial and helpful just in different areas and different sections. So it was hard to take a step back and evaluate everything. And when I started realizing I don't know as much as I thought I did, and that maybe I wasn't as educated as I thought I was, that was a very hard pill to swallow,
Right.
So
Yeah, I can only imagine. And it's because, essentially, in some ways, you had to like admit to yourself that the things you were doing were maybe not right, right? Or at least not in the best, what was going to help your son in the most deep ways that you possibly could. And I could see where that was really difficult to
yeah, well, I thought I was
that.
doing all the things. I was
Right.
doing all the things. I was doing all the therapies. I was doing everything everybody told me. And at one point in time, I had asked questions about doing other things. And one of the practitioners was like, you need to take a step back as like a practitioner, and you just need to be mom. And I'm like, well, that's fine.
Right.
But I still think it's a good idea to ask these questions and to figure out if I'm missing something. So I felt very taken back and scorned from that. Like I was like, well, why can't I ask these questions? Just because I'm a practitioner and a parent, I feel like I can do both, but apparently I wasn't allowed to. So
yeah. And, I even found that with myself is like, okay, well, we're talking about, when I was given the options on my son, it was, here are your options of things to do. And I never really got a good feeling that anyone was telling me on how I was going to improve his condition. It was very much so, here are the things we're going to do to help him with his condition, to manage his condition. And I refused to accept that,
Yeah.
frankly. I was like, I think a lot of people are like, just prepare for him never to talk. And I'm like, what else is there out there? And having an open mind to go and start exploring that. And I think that's, if we could have more of that in medicine altogether, I think we would definitely be better off.
Hmm.
So when you went into, starting to go into functional medicine to help your son, what did that look like? What were the things that
Yeah.
you started to learn that seemed to kind of say, okay, now I think I can help him?
Yeah, it's so funny. I had a friend who was a nurse, and she wasn't very. She was a crunchy mom, and she, left me breadcrumbs. She was very nice about everything. Like, she was never pushy. She was never like trying to throw things in my face or anything. She would literally like just leave me like little breadcrumbs. Like, hey, why don't you join this Facebook group? Some moms are doing some pretty crazy things with their autistic children and seeing results. So one of the first things I started doing was working on his gut health and really understanding more about what his microbiome looked like. He was suffering with a lot of gut issues, a lot of constipation issues and things like that. So, I started working on that. Then I started looking around with like some gentle detoxes and stuff. And I'm like, oh, okay, I feel safe about this. Like I felt like I was okay. And there was always like, and I always tell my patients, like if there is if you have a gut feeling about something as a parent, do it, because usually your gut will never steer you wrong. And there was some things about, looking at some supplements and things that my gut was just like, you need to do this. Even though my brain was like, I don't know if this is a great idea. My gut, my mom instinct was like, you need to do this. And it started working. And when I realized that how much gut health and detox really helped my son, I was like, oh my gosh, I just feel like I uncovered Pandora's box here.
Yeah, I think that's a lot how this happens. It's a little bit of trial and error, right? Trying
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
things, and I mean, other things I've tried, even outside of kind of my, I would say, I use a lot of the things you do, but I have maybe more of a, working on directly how the brain's wired. But it's looking at all of these different things, and to me, it's like I think that's an important point for people to think about. Is like we get so stuck into what is evidence-based or what has had 10 years of clinical trials. Well, to me, if the scientific mechanism makes sense and I know I'm not going to hurt my child, then these things make sense to try. And I don't think there's harm in doing that. And I think I think we need to have a lot more of a mindset on, um, you know, hey, this is something that we should have open mind that this is something that from a more traditional medical standpoint, let's be open to these things.
Yeah.
Let's not just disregard them because they haven't been put into some sort of guideline by some sort of organization.
And that's
Um,
part of the problem. I had somebody who was a therapist message me on Instagram, and she was like, I want to see the research that detoxing autistic children work. And I was like, well, it's not like cholesterol. It's not like I could just, whip out labs and say, okay, I put 20 people with cholesterol on a statin and this is what happened to their cholesterol. When you're working individually with kids with autism, you could put 10 kids in a room, or 20 or 40 or 50, 100,000. They all have different issues. They all have different biochemistry. So it is very subjective. It depends on that particular person, their labs, and what's going on inside their body to actually see what interventions they need that you could see improvements for. So there's, research is important, and we use research in different areas, but we can't just say, okay, if there's no study, it means it doesn't exist or it doesn't work. That's not what we're saying. A lot of what you and I do probably is more of the proof is in the progress. We work with these kids and we could see when we start here, they end here, and we could see their improvements with what interventions we've done.
and talk to the parents, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they'll tell you it works
Yeah.
when they see the changes that they do see. I think in particular with what you do, gut health is something that probably if anyone has been exposed to more biomedical type of healing or even considering it, gut health is probably what comes up the most
Hmm.
commonly with autism. Why does that work? What is so important about the gut when it comes to autism?
So what most people don't understand is that when a child is born, their gut is kind of evolving and transitioning and growing. And when your gut is developing and transitioning and growing, it actually impacts the way your brain is growing and developing and functioning. So with kids with autism, we know from research, because we started to track this in the last 5 years or more, their microbiome and their biochemistry in their gut are very different than neurotypical children. They tend to have either a lot of overgrowth, they have a lot of digestive insufficiency and digestion issues. They tend to all, like, I think it's about 80 to 85% of kids with autism have microbiome issues, constipation, diarrhea, gas, bloating. I mean, it's astronomical, the amount of gut issues that our kids face. And it's kind of goes back to the why. Why are these kids so at a disadvantage versus neurotypical group of children? And unfortunately, we still don't know the answer to that. A lot of it could be genetics. It could be something that happened within the first few years of life in their gut, when their gut was trying to develop. It could be because of medication, antibiotics. There's so many variables that occur to a child's microbiome that could be damaging within the first 2 years of their life. And unfortunately, when things damage within the first 2 years of life, it can actually then impact how the brain is functioning for the rest of that time as well. So why kids are having these issues and why kids with autism are having these gut issues, I don't know if we have a direct correlation or a direct link. I think that it could be up to like 8 different things that could kind of trigger the microbiome to go in a negative light. But we just do know from research, I either have kids with tons of overgrowth or kids with a very gut deficient, microbiome, where they just have no gut for them to actually work and to do a job that it needs to do.
Right. And I think it's important for people to realize that when we're born, our gut is underdeveloped. It's not, I think there's a term, the term probably people are most familiar with is leaky gut. Which, basically means that the gut lining is not mature, not operating, in different proteins and inflammatory compounds can get through that lining, creating an inflammatory response. But we're born with leaky gut, essentially. Our parasympathetic nervous system, which, the vagus nerve is what comes down from the brain to innervate that gut lining. All that stuff is kind of underdeveloped. And so, I think you're right. I think between what we call epigenetics. So, you might have a better way to describe this, but to me, epigenetics are simply, kind of parts of our genes that we have enzymes essentially that either run too fast or run too slow. And the environment can either have a positive impact, so we can do certain things that we help augment that genetic expression, and then the environment can also cause a negative impact. So there's no genetic mutation and there's no like damage to the brain. And what I mean by that is there's not like a stroke or something like that. There's nothing structurally damaged within the brain. So we know that just from that it's changeable. And I think that is an important thing that to talk about with parents, because I think there's a lot of hesitation to reach out and do these things. Number one, from, okay, is it woo, like you said earlier, is this a woo-woo type of thing? What am I getting myself into? But also this stigma to, there almost seems to be this societal push that there's nothing wrong with these kids. They're just perfect the way they are. And we shouldn't, it's almost denying their existence to even try to change them. How do you navigate that?
Here, you and I have had a lot of discussions about this as well. And we're not saying that we don't love our children. I think Correct. It's because we love Absolutely. Them so much. We're trying to literally overturn every rock and every stone and everything that we possibly can do to help them. What we do know is that kids with autism, ADHD, and other type of neurological disorders are completely imbalanced in their body. If our goal, and I say this a lot, is not to cure them, is not to recover them. I don't like using those words because I definitely think there's two different types of autism in this world. There's autism that is a genetic abnormality that happens within utero that, we can't see, we can't always identify, but just something went wrong. And unfortunately, that's just how it presents as a true autism diagnosis. And then what we're seeing now is not true autism. It's environmental toxicity, it's gut and brain damage and things like that. And I think that's where a lot of people are like, well, this is where I am recovering my child. This is where we're seeing them turn around and do a complete 180. They're a different kid now. They might lose their diagnosis. I've had kids I've
Right.
worked with lose their diagnosis. I've had kids go from level 3 to level 1. I mean, we aren't, that's not our goal, but we do know when I do these labs on these kids, they are completely imbalanced. They're in pain. They're uncomfortable in their own body. They're not sleeping. They're not eating well. They're physically and mentally not doing well. They're sick. They're not healthy individuals. And part of that is, if you have an autistic child, you might know, 80 to 90% of them eat 10, 15 foods,
Right.
So, their nutrition is suffering, their body's suffering, they have nutrient deficiencies. They are just imbalanced from the start. And there is nothing wrong with helping a child work to their fullest potential and have them as balanced as they possibly can be. Because when kids feel their best, they do their best, just like an adult. If I just ran on coffee and French fries, I'm not gonna function well. I'm not gonna do my best. But when I'm getting good food, I'm getting my nutrients, I'm taking my supplements, I feel great. I'm ready to go. Let's go. I'm a productive person. We need to look at these kids as, unfortunately, they are not balanced. We need to rebalance them.
Yeah, and I always phrase it to parents is like, look, I'm not trying to change who your child is. I just want them to be the best version of themselves that they possibly can be.
Yep.
I think pretty much all of these kids have incredible gifts. And sometimes there's just so much inflammation or so much imbalance within their nervous system that they're not able to express that. They're not able to show that to us. And, it's almost like the spectrum's almost too big. And what I mean by that is there are definitely very balanced kids who are out there. They're going to be your people at MIT who are putting, rockets onto Mars. Okay. That's no doubt incredible gifts and skills. And then there's other, kids who are adults who can't dress themselves. Okay. Cannot care for themselves in any way. And, I don't want those kids to be left behind because of this. And I think what people also don't realize is that the comorbidities with autism, they don't live as long. Their mortality rate is higher. They have more chronic disease. They have more autoimmune disease because of these imbalances are not just personality or I feel like that's almost what it is. People think this is more of a personality or maybe even a lifestyle, but it's really how not only how their brain's wired, but also how their body reacts because of that wiring. So it tends towards more inflammation, and they're just not going to feel as good. They're not going to have as good quality of life if we don't deal with that.
So I think, when you look at the population, the American population, genius level is less than 1%. In the autism world, genius level of autistic individuals is 1 to 2. So that's where I think people are like, oh, but if you're autistic, you're a genius, because you see the 6-year-old who got accepted into Harvard,
Right.
or the 16-year-old that's going to become a lawyer right now. Here's the thing. When you showcase these examples, it makes it look like autism is no big deal. So yeah, I have a problem with that as an autism parent, because usually what I say is, please stop asking what my son's superpower is, because there are times we're just trying to keep up with life. And it's not fair that when you group all of our kids in the same boat, you can't expect certain ones to do more than others, and you kind of just say, oh, well, everyone can do this, look, and that's not the case. And we need to stop grouping them together. They need to be separated.
Oh, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more with that. And just a lot of I think we just need to be able to, I'm glad we're actually having this conversation because I think we need more of it. So, because this shouldn't, I think the worst thing we do is have this division,
Yeah.
within the spectrum. It's because even the kids who, like the examples you gave, I bet a lot of them still struggle socially. They probably still
Mm.
struggle, with social interaction and engagement just because of how we know, certain parts of because, whenever you get these kind of, genius level things, and wiring in your brain, those strengths also come along with some weaknesses, just like we all have.
Yeah. It was interesting because no one ever talks about like nervous system or a child being so imbalanced in that way. And it's interesting because when you ask your medical professionals and you ask the people who are supposed to be the experts in everything autism, it's kind of like they look at you like you have six heads.
Right.
They look at you like, what are you talking about? What do you mean the nervous system? He is fine. Oh, constipation here, just do Miralax. Oh, he's crying and hitting his head. Let's do some clonidine or something, or, a low dose of, an SSRI or something. Like I had a family the other day because their child was diagnosed with ADHD and he's 3. And the doctor wanted to put him on medication. And I'm looking at them going, how did we get here? How did we get to the point that we completely look at a 3-year-old and say he has ADHD, he can't sit still, let's start medicating him because the teachers are having a difficult time with him. We've lost touch with reality on how to actually help people and how to actually help these kids from an early age, and it's getting worse.
Yeah, and I think I think a part of that comes down to, I mean, one of the things that really hit home when I started, reading things, and there's still the why on why that's, disconnected to begin with, but what really changed my kind of perspective was when I started understanding what was going on in his brain, where there was
Mm-hmm.
miscommunication between, the brain and the body, to have the behavior and the different things we were seeing. And I think that's something that has to happen on that medical side, on that pediatrician side, is starting
Mm-hmm.
having a better understanding. I mean, they don't need to be neuroscientists, but I
Yeah.
think some education on, understanding why these things are happening. That constipation is a neurological problem,
Yeah.
and a gut flora problem, and all of these other things, and, not to just brush that aside as just some minor symptom. And that's a long
Yeah.
process, and I think that's a difficult, thing to kind of break through for sure. But I think for parents, they're listening to this, and a lot of parents are looking for ways to look for alternatives, because certainly, for a vast majority of people, their pediatrician is not going to tell them to go to the
Yeah.
crazy functional medicine doctor. So what advice do you have to parents, or the crazy chiropractor, even worse? What advice do you have to parents who want to start stepping into this? What are some steps for them to
Yeah.
make?
So, I always tell my families Rome was not built in a day. I don't expect you to be an expert. I don't expect you to understand I'm sure you understand. We're still learning. We're
Absolutely.
still you and I can be experts in certain areas of this biomedical world, but we don't know everything and can't be experts on every aspect. Like, I am not an expert in primitive reflexes, but of course, that's where you come in. So, usually what I tell my families is, let's start with like one thing at a time. Let's start looking at maybe your child's gut, doing a stool test, making sure they're getting the proper nutrition, maybe taking away some of that processed food and adding in new foods. Listen, it took me a long time to get my son to be 100% gluten-free. Took me a while to start incorporating other foods. My son has ARFID, which is a severe feeding disorder.
Right.
So, it's beyond picky eating. So, everybody's going to have a different path and a different journey. But if you can make a list of the things that you want to do or the things you want to look into, you do that and you start scratching it off the list. I have like free guides for my families to actually help them say, okay, this is what we should do first. Let's write down what I want to be looking at, because let's keep the rabbit holes to a minimum.
Right.
And let's keep the rabbit holes to what are pertinent for your child, because the last thing you want to do is waste a month researching something that has no bearing on your child's, support system at all. But there are people like you and I who have a lot of these resources or are able to help navigate a patient through the process to say, okay, here's what we need to start with. This is what we're going to look at. And then this is how we're going to proceed, because let's not throw spaghetti at a wall and hope something's going to stick. Let's be precise on what we're actually trying to accomplish here with your child.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I do sometimes, you get, I get parents in and they'll come in with like every functional medicine test under the sun, right?
Yeah.
And then you get that like a paralysis by analysis, right? Where it's like, okay, there's all these different routes to go to. And I agree. That's something I would totally agree with, is making it as simple as possible. And that way you can always, it starts allowing you to assess, because sometimes these things are kind of domino effects, right? You have a messed up gut. And so, yeah, you're going to be inflamed. And so you're going to start seeing immune dysfunction, where they're going to start reacting to all kind of things, both environmental and food. And so, I think, I think that does make a lot of sense. And that makes it more practical for the parent too. Because when you start talking about, okay, I'm going to change his diet and I got to give him these supplements to change his gut flora. And then I'm also, trying to find out every single toxin in the world that I can avoid him from. I mean, you can't put these kids in a bubble. There's just certain things, eating organic. Okay, that's great. But you can only avoid this stuff so much, right? So,
and we're not looking for perfection. We're looking
right.
for sustainability. That's what I tell my families all the time. I am not perfect by any means. And I don't expect anyone to be perfect, because perfect is not sustainable. It's not, unless you live off the grid in Colorado somewhere in a mountain,
Right.
It's very different. It's very hard to be perfect. So we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for sustainability and what we could do long term.
So you mentioned stool testing. What are kind of the stuff which is one of my favorite things to do too.
Yeah.
What is that going to tell you? What does that look like? And do you typically because a lot of people like that and food sensitivities, there's a big thing.
Yeah.
Do you like to kind of look at the gut first? Or do you like to look at that with food sensitivities together? What's your kind of thought process there?
So it depends on the child. So if the parent comes to me and they say my kid eats less than 15 foods, I don't even bother doing a food sensitivity test. It's not worth the time. It's not worth the energy. It's not worth the blood. I just say, let's forgo the food sensitivity, because your kid's going to react to everything, because they're only eating 15 foods. So what we need to do is actually, let's start trying to expand their diet. Let's try to start expanding what they're eating, or start changing. Okay, they're eating gluten and you want them getting off of it. Okay, they eat muffins. Let's find a different muffin swap that's gluten-free that they'll eat. So we start usually something simple like that. So that's where I look at the microbiome and we say, okay, where are the gaps? Because are the issues with the digestion, the inflammation, the overgrowth, the undergrowth, the H. pylori, all these different things, are these impacting the fact that your kid doesn't want to eat more food? Because sometimes that happens too. Once we get the gut moving and get the gut rebalanced, it's like, poof, everything takes off. The kid feels better. He's pooping regularly. He feels good. His gut's going, like he doesn't feel sick, and he's going to start eating more food. That sometimes happens too. Not always, but sometimes. So sometimes, for me, the gut is always number one. That's going to be the first thing I'm going to do with every kid.
100%. And I find too, even when you go through some of that gut healing process, you even decrease some of the food sensitivities, if not all the food sensitivities anyway. Some of them I think are just going to be there no matter what you do. But you'll find that takes care of some of the problem. And you're right. I mean, you're going to get into a situation with a parent or a kid who's only eaten 5 foods, and you're going to have to limit that diet. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I agree. And I think that, to your point about like the muffins, like even if it's processed crap, just making that change of, making those, it's like baby steps, right? Not that I'm advocating for processed foods. I think that's the key for parents to realize. And I do that even with when I'm, working on the neuro work, like we don't have to worry about doing all these high level stuff when they're very low functioning or not. We just want to need to stimulate their primitive reflexes. We're going to do the most basic things first, and then we can build off that success as we go forward.
Correct. Yeah. It's, again, baby steps. I mean, because we're not trying to overwhelm the parent who has to deal with all these things at home. And I think sometimes practitioners don't understand that parents are the ones that have to do all of the work. it can be very overwhelming, very, very stressful. So I kind of just explain to the parent, let's just start doing one thing at a time. Let's make it easy for you and let's make it less stressful for them too, because then it makes because when they're stressed, you're stressed and then no one gets anything accomplished. So we want to make sure we accomplish what we want.
Yeah. And absolutely. And then because they're already stressed out to begin with most of the time. Life is difficult, just surviving. And so if you make these impossible levels that they have to achieve, they're just going to get frustrated. And that can be, that ends up being the net negative, defeating the purpose. But,
Right.
I think that's, absolutely great advice. Well, Greer, I really appreciate you, sharing your story, coming on the show. That was such great information. I think that helps parents kind of know that there's more stuff to do out there, and it's not as scary as it may seem, and it's not as crazy as it may seem either, right?
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed the conversation. I hope maybe we can do this again and get into some more topics. For everyone, thank you for joining us here on the Neurotrition Podcast. Don't forget to follow us on our social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Neurotrition Podcast. And Greer, what's your socials? You got some great stuff on your stuff as well.
It's Biomedical Healing for Kids, and that's my website and my handle. And I also on Instagram, and I also have a private Facebook group where people can join and, get support if they need it and ask questions. And I'm pretty, I'm in there a lot. So if you have questions, you're always able to tag me in there.
That's a great resource. Okay. Thank you for everyone for joining the Neurotrition Podcast. I'm Dr. Z. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.